as you guys know, now we start a series of guest lectures. The first one is from Cho. He's an associate professor at UCLA and also a researcher at Google. Fun fact, like he is a former student of Professor Inderjeet, so he has been at UT and he did his PhD here um, quite a few years ago. But yeah, he has done a lot of amazing work all across machine learning, and recently he has been doing a lot of good work on LLMs and prompting and doing them efficient fine-tuning them. So this talk will not be very detailed about all of these works, but like will give you a good flavor of what's been happening in this area. And I'll let Cho take the stage now.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to give a talk. And happy to, yeah, as Nilesh mentioned, I was in Austin 2010 to 2015. So, yeah, it's great to have a chance to talk in the lecture again. um, yeah, so today I'm going to talk about large language models, mostly focusing on how do people use large language models in practice and some challenges and how people resolve those challenges in real applications. And um, yeah, so I checked the previous lectures, and I think you guys already know about language modeling and transformers. So we don't need to go into detail for that. But those two things are the main breakthrough that empowers the large language models. So basically, people find if we train a neural network model to conduct next word prediction on a very large corpus, and we use the transformer architecture, then the resulting models have like very strong capability in many different things beyond we originally imagined. So today we're focusing on when you combine this next word prediction and transformer architecture, you get large language models, and how are the performance of LLMs and how do people use them. So this is some like a historical plot for the size of the models. So like before this is like before 2020, uh there's so I think you guys already heard about the bird models and some earlier transformer models that are before 2020, and those are kind of here. They have like a size around several hundred million parameters. Like this is the size of bird large. I think it's 2018 models, and there are bigger ones released later, but they are like several hundred millions to a few billion parameters. And in around 2020, OpenAI trained the GPT-3 model, which increased the size of parameters by a lot. And and at that time, we don't know whether this is useful or not. But when the GPT-3 released, they show some very strong capabilities. So first things they found is in GPT-3 is the scaling loss. Well, we see the so originally we think when we train the model, larger models, at some point the performance will like be plateau and you don't see much improvement, maybe beyond a few billion parameters. But this is not true when you train the next word prediction like language model with transformer. So they found that when you increase the number of parameters and in the same time you also increase the data size and the compute for training those network, then you see the test loss actually drop linearly as you increase the parameters and data set size and compute exponentially. So if you plot the so in this kind of plot, you the x-axis are parameters, size, and compute. They are like in the log scale, and you see it's like a linear line in the log scale. figure. So this is called the scaling law, which means as you keep increasing your model, your data, and your compute, you get better and better performance. And by the way, feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. Yeah.
A quick question
Um,
on that. Like, is this still true in 2025 that the
I
plot?
think my feeling is we kind of see some limitation um, in text domain, but I think for multi-model, they are still kind of satisfying this. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, for text pre-training, I think there are some barrier people are seeing now. But I don't know whether it's like an algorithm. There could be some better. So one belief is there could be some better algorithm you can use to overcome the barrier. And um,
By
but
algorithm, you mean like some optimization method, tool, or architecture itself?
that's what we're working on. But there are other things,
Okay,
many things people are trying. But yeah,
I see. Okay, thank you.
yeah. Yeah. And what does that mean when you see the loss decreasing? So we may think like this is just, for example, you have sentiment analysis, you increase the performance from 95 to 98, or you have a machine translation task, you improve the blue score from 30 to 40. It's good, but does that, is it really a breakthrough? So another important finding in around 2022 is that as your language model becomes stronger and stronger, it's actually gained some emergent abilities that's growing. So the perform this means you see the performance on some benchmark increase certainly when you train the model up to when you train a very large language model. Like in the right figure, you see the horizontal axis is the parameter size and the y-axis is the accuracy. And you see when you're in some smaller model region, it's kind of improving but not so significant. But as long as um, your model is larger um, than some threshold, then it start to blow up. The performance start to increase drastically, like what you see here. And so people call this emergent ability, and actually this is not only the ability you see on like different benchmark. It's actually gained a general ability to handle many realistic tasks that we face every day. So it's kind of amazing. Not only like perform very good on the benchmark set, but you also gain a lot of general ability to solve like general problems. And people so people call this emergent ability because we see this in human learning. So in like that figure is kind of the psychology um thing. So you see when we grow as a kid from 1 year, 2 year, 3 years old, you don't see much improvement in ability. But when you go to 4 or 5, you see the kid suddenly becomes very mature and they can do many different things. And the underlying hypothesis is that so in psychology the hypothesis is you're building up the connection between the neurons in your brain, and as long as you get more and more connections, suddenly you get like very strong general ability to solve the many different tasks. And this is maybe the same thing in large language models with transformers. Okay, so today we're going to show what the large language models can do, and we're going to talk about two ways to use it. First is the first way is fine tuning, which I think you already see this in the previous lectures, like in earlier when people use BERT models or other smaller language models, they always do fine tuning because your model learns something from the pre-training data, and then you can fine tune your model which means you train the parameters of your model on some end task that you care about, and then you can get good performance. And this fine tuning can also benefit from large language model because you have lot of neurons, lot of parameters to memorize lot of things in the pre-training step, and that will transfer to high performance in downstream tasks when you do fine tuning. But beyond fine tuning, there's another very important usage of large language model, which you can use it through prompting without any fine tuning, without even knowing the model weights. So prompting means, and I think the prompting is we are able to use it because the emergent ability, because language models up to a certain size, they become able to understand the instructions, what you want to ask, and what the task you want to do. So you can actually tell the language model what you want to do through the natural language prompt, and then it can do many different things without any training. And so basically, in prompting, we instruct LLMs to predict based on the instruction, which are natural language. And the good thing is you only require forward pass, and you don't even need to access the weights. For example, now you have lots of even closed source language model like GPT and Gemini. You can just ask questions, and they can help you to perform some what you ask. And if you call the API, you can also use it as a model to do whatever you want to do. So I will first, in this talk, I will first talk about prompting, and then we will spend some time to talk about fine tuning. It's basically similar to BERT fine tuning, but there are some new challenge due to the size of the model. Okay, so prompting, I'll just first show some examples of prompting. So basically, we there are simple prompt and there are more complicated prompt I will talk about. So basically, you can tell the language model. So this is like a you can think this is the kind of next word prediction, right? You give the prefix like this. So classify the text into neutral, negative, or positive, and you give the original text you want to classify, and you ask the language model what's the sentiment of this sentence, and then you this whole thing is called the prompt, which is the prefix you pass into the LM, and then you do the next word prediction. So for example, the LM will say the next word is neutral, which means the like this sentence is neutral. This is the LM's prediction. And you can use similar things to do like an instruction. You can control the instruction to perform many different tasks. Like you can say summarize the paragraph, which so this will become a summarization model. So once you enter the original paragraph, it will summarize the paragraph like this. Okay. Okay, so those are the instruction probably many of you already use, like when you use ChatGPT or Gemini to do something, to perform some work. And there are more complex instructions like this. And the amazing part is the LM is actually able to understand complex instructions and even very long instructions. So this is an example from Big Bench Hard, which is kind of a collection of tasks, and hard means it's like one of the harder ones selected by people. So like in this task, we want to ask the language model to detect the type of error in the translation, and you can even define uh, what are the potential errors you can make, and then given this sentence what kind of errors it's made, and then the language model will answer it. Okay, so we don't need to go into detail, but basically you can this is just try to illustrate you can give very complex instructions and to the LM, and it can solve this task without fine tuning. And then in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about different kind of prompting technique people usually use. And the first techniques is in context learning, which is I think people start to do this in GPT-2, even though GPT-2 is not a very strong model. It's I think it's much maybe just slightly larger than BERT model, but people start to see some in context learning ability here. So in context learning means you give the model k demos, and each demo is the input output pair. So for example, in this case, I want to do sentiment analysis. So the first demo, you can see I give the first demo, this movie is great, and the answer is positive. And then another sentence, another demo, worst film I've ever seen, the answer is negative. Okay, so you give a few of these samples, and then you ask what's the sentiment of this, and you want the LN to answer it. Okay, so answer is negative in this case. So basically, if you have some task, you have a few um, training data with input output pair, but you don't have much or you don't want to do fine tuning, then you can just include all these samples in the prompt and ask LLM to make a prediction. And this is called in context learning. So I think earlier in like 3 4 years ago when it's only GPT-2, people start to talking about this, but at that time it's not very clear. So we see in context learning can help improving the performance, but there are a lot of people try to answer why this is the case, and there are lots of counter arguments. Like, for example, there are papers showing if you so what do we learn from in context learning? So there are arguments like in context learning just try to fix the format, or even if you shuffle these different samples, you get very different results. And there are some work showing if you try to just uh, give the wrong answer in context learning, it still improve the performance. So maybe it's not really learning from the samples. But I think in the more recent LLM, because the capability is much stronger, it seems like mostly it will follow what you're supposed to do in when you give some examples to a human or a AI model. So yeah, it's more stable in terms of the re-ranking or how you word each demo, things like that. When you go to very large language models, okay, and
So,
there are yeah.
sorry, a quick question. So here, the current understanding of how in context learning is helping an LLM is that it is sort of, I mean, the LLM is able to do some smart KNN over the
Yeah,
given examples.
yeah.
I see.
Yeah, I think the most recent, the most promising explanation is that it's kind of, uh, when you do you can imagine when you give some like a prompt like this,
Hmm.
when you do the attention, it will try to attend to some more relevant, exemplars, and then it's kind of doing retrieval, based prediction. Yeah.
So in a sense, like, let's say there is a query which requires the learning to be a composition of two examples. Like the two examples, both of them help in answering something. Then do you think like on those tasks, the in-context learning approach might not work well?
No, I think it's okay. It's like you can attend to two examples. so, so, so I think the one explanation is it's kind of kernel method. So you can imagine you have some similarity or relationship between this testing sample and all the training samples,
Hmm.
and then in kernel method you try to compute the similarity based on the kernel, right? And here you try to get a similarity based on the attention. uh, mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to think like something which requires some composition, learning over multiple examples. Let's say like the answer of one example helped in maybe clarifying the question of this another
Yeah.
example. But yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you're
Yes.
saying it's not like a simple retrieval. You like a one example contribute to part of the answer, another part contribute to another.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it's. I think it's able to do that, but it's good to
Okay.
test. Yeah.
Okay. Nice to see. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and there's explanation about why the language model have this in context learning ability. So the hypothesis is probably in the pre-training phase because it see a lot of data. So you see many sequence of samples kind of like this in the pre-training, and you know what you need to predict next because you're doing next word prediction. So when you see a lot of sample sequence in the pre-training, you kind of know if you're given a sequence of things, you need to follow the rule to predict the next one. And then this is how the language model learn to perform like in context learning. Yeah. Yeah. So another important prompting technique, and in particular useful for reasoning tasks, is the chain of thought prompting. So in some domains, especially math, it's very hard to learn the answer. It's hard to learn anything from just the answer. For example, if you look at the figure on the left hand side, if you just do standard prompting, like in context learning based prompting, then you will ask a question and the answer is 11 and another question. So because the answer is just a number, so it's doesn't give much information on how to solve this question. And I think in this case, the and doesn't gain much power by those in context samples. And people find that if you, for example, in this example, if you add the detailed derivation of how you get the answer, for example, instead of just saying the answer is 11, you say, wow, how you derive this 11 here in the prompt. Then the model will also, when the model see another question, it will also try to derive some sentences, which is the thinking process, and then eventually get the answer. And people find language model usually give much better performance if you have this kind of thinking process. And the train of thought prompting means in the in context learning examples, you need to give the thinking process for each example. So the language model also learned that given a question, it need to do the thinking process. So it will improve the performance by a significant amount. And these are different kind of so the difficult part of this is instead of just putting the data, you need to write the thinking process, and not all the math like a data set or any data set you have, most of them don't really have the thinking process. So you need to, in the original COT paper, this kind of manually written down by human, and then we collect a lot of these samples and then doing context learning. Okay, and this is the performance improvement by channel of thought. So we can see larger models benefit more from the chain of thoughts, and I think the intuition is smaller models don't really know how to think. So even if you ask it to think, it doesn't give a correct reasoning, and sometimes it even make more mistake because you have very long kind of reasoning process, or any intermediate step. If you make a mistake, it will be wrong. um but with people see if you increase the model size, then the train of thought can significantly improve the performance. Like in GPT, if you go to a larger one, it can boost the performance of GSM. So GSM, I think those are the mathematical reasoning tasks, and you can see it can improve the performance by 40% or more, which is kind of very significant. Okay, and there are many variations of train of thoughts. Um, yeah, so I won't list all of them here. This is just some examples I'm more familiar with. So, for example, there's auto COT, which try to. So as I mentioned here, the in the train of thought, you need to write the reasoning process by yourself. So it's kind of hard sometimes. So there's a line of work on automatic generating the thinking process here. And the easiest way is you just have some meta prompts. You can ask a large language model like GT4 to produce the thinking process, and then you add them as the in context example in the in context example as a train of thought. And then there are lots of different designs on how you generate those automatic thinking process and how you and they won't be all correct. So how you correct the thinking process or how you select more correct ones to include. and and there's also some other things like for example, I think in one of my example you can see usually in some prompting for like benchmark data set you often see this sentence, let's think step by step. So actually there's some paper showing if you include this sentence in the prompt, let's think step by step, then this will trigger the LM to do like better or more like a thinking process. Um and I think kind of underlying reason is maybe in the pre-training step the LNC many times if you want to think step by step, then this will associate with some like a reasoning process. So when you artificially add this to the prompt, this will trigger the LN to do something like that. And also there are other work like self consistency, means if you can generate multiple like reasoning trajectory and then try to check the consistency between different trajectory to get the final answer. Uh, yeah. So any question about this? No? Okay. Yeah. So now we have a kind of understanding on how we write a good prompt for like hard, for example, mathematical reasoning task. So you usually have an instruction, and then you can put some in context examples like a question answer pairs, and for each question answer pair you have a train of thought reasoning in between, so which will trigger the language model to do the thinking process in the testing time. And then you have a final question you want the language model to answer, and then you put this whole thing as a prompt, and the language model will try to reply by the answer. Okay. So you can see there are many different things in prompting, and you need to write things like this, and you need to write the instruction and how you organize everything together. So there are actually lots of people working on just purely uh, forming the prompt to communicate with large language models. So if I think I did this Google search, this is even more than 1 year ago, and there are lots of pages talking about how to do prompt engineering, and there's a page saying AI prompt engineer can earn more than 300K salaries, which is which shows this is an important task, and many people try to do that. So how prompt design typically works? So usually the prompt engineer or the domain experts, they will design some initial prompt. They pass the prompt to LN to get some results, to get some evaluation, and then based on the evaluation results, you can look at the results and refine, improve your prompt, and then you do this again and again to convert to some good prompt. So this is kind of require a lot of human human involvement. So that's why we see the prompt engineer can earn a lot of salary, um, and it's really hard to know what is a good prompt. So it's kind of a try and error process, um, and also it's there's other problem like if we see like companies like Google or GPT or OpenAI or Facebook, they release LM every half year or every 1 year. So whenever there's a new LM, you might need to uh, refine your prompt based on the new LM, which is kind of very hard task. So in the final part of prompting, I will talk about automatic prompt engineering, which is the goal is to automate this whole process. So we want to remove the human or prompt engineer here and replace this by an algorithm or an AI model. So we want the automatic algorithm, and it should be efficient to generate prompt to optimize the performance. So the problem can be formulated like this. You have a task and you have some data, and you are given some LLM model which will be used for inference. So I want to have an algorithm to generate the prompt to optimize the performance based on this task and training data. Uh, when you use this LLM as a inference engine. So basically the automatic prompt engineering are usually useful when in a situation. So there are two useful situations. One is if you don't have resource or you to train or you don't have access to the LM, then very naturally you can just try to optimize your prompt to get the best performance. So that's very important in those scenarios. And another useful scenario is you have some uh, LN with with small data sets. So we found if you have very small data set like less than 100 samples, then it's very hard to even do fine tuning because you can imagine there's only 100 samples, so it's very easy for and your language model have like more than 100 billion parameters, so it's very easy to overfit those 100 sample and uh, but if you use prompt engineering by these 100 samples, then it's less easy to overfit and usually have better generation performance. Okay. So then in the next few slides, I will talk about a few. Oh, I think I need to move. I will talk about a few automatic prompt engineering algorithms. Um, so all of them share a similar thing. So they are trying to use LM itself for prompt engineering. Okay, so the first work is it's this is called APE. So their goal is to so we can see from here for any prompt you have an instruction here. So they ask the question if I'm given some input output pairs, and can I use LM to automatically generate the instruction based on the input output pair? So I don't need to write down. So maybe I'm not exactly sure what's the instruction I should use, or I don't know what's the best way to write this instruction. So I can the question is, can I use the training data like just 3 or 5 input output pair to automatically generate this instruction? So the interesting thing is they use LLM to do this, right? So they show if you uh so if you look at this blue block, so you have some demonstration about the input output pair, and then you can ask the LN to generate the instruction based on this input output pair. So it's kind of saying Professor Smith, because I think there's people there are people earlier like few years ago, people find if you write something like more professional here, then it will generate better results. So basically this prompt is like, given the input output pair, the LN look at this prompt, will try to generate the instruction for this task. And then you have other parts, like you can generate multiple instructions, and then you try the performance of each of them. So for example, you use this prompt to generate a lot of instructions. You run each instruction to get the performance of them, and then you choose what you want to keep, and then you do the few iterations of this. Okay. But this is only about instruction. How about in general? How can we use prompt engineering, like automatic prompt engineering, to improve the performance or improve the prompt? So most of the work along this line follow the evolutionary search framework, where we have some initial prompt for the algorithm, which is kind of an LLM. So with the initial prompt, we try to generate a pool of candidates based on, like, we can ask LLM to randomly rewrite a sentence in a prompt, or randomly summarize or rewrite or do anything you want to edit the prompt, and then you can generate a pool of prompt candidates, and then you can evaluate those prompt candidates on the evaluation data. Like I mentioned, we assume, for example, you have 100 data to evaluate how good is the prompt. So we can evaluate the performance of each prompt, and then you get the results. And then the results, the algorithm can look at the results to decide which prompt they want to keep in the pool, or how to rewrite the prompt in the next iteration. And then you do this iteratively. So every time you are supposed to keep the better prompt, and then you learn how to rewrite the prompt to optimize the performance. So after several iterations, you can keep improving the performance of your prompt. Okay. So this is another diagram to illustrate the algorithm I mentioned here. So you have top K prompts. You have, like I mentioned, you maintain a pool of like a K prompts. K can be 5, 10, or some smaller numbers. And every time you can randomly select a prompt and to generate a new prompt from here. So like I mentioned, you can rewrite or add anything or delete a sentence from the original prompt, and then evaluate the updated one from the training data, from the evaluation data, and then decide whether you want to add to the pool or not. And um, it's we call it a bin search framework because you keep the top K prompts. It's kind of like in the LN decoding procedure, you keep the top K candidates when you do the decoding. Okay. And you can see as this is the training process, so as the iteration goes, uh, number of evaluation means how many times you evaluate the prompt, and as the iteration grows, you get like better and better performance on the downstream task.
Sorry, this part I didn't get. Once you select a randomly selected prompt, how do you generate a new prompt?
So you
We
can,
eval. Okay.
yeah, so the simplest way you can just randomly rewrite a sentence or rewrite a paragraph or rewrite the whole prompt. You asking
Mhm.
the LM to do the rewriting.
I
Uh,
see.
so we found that is the most effective way, and there are also other operations you can do, like you can remove some sentence or you can summarize the prompt. Or,
So, but this doesn't get the input to that this randomly selected prompt got this score.
oh
So,
yeah, and
and historically, these prompts have gotten these scores. So maybe use it to somehow.
yeah. So in our paper, we actually have some ways to use it, and so for example, you can um based on the history, you can know maybe your prompt have 5 or 10 parts, and based on the history, you know which part is more like potentially can give more improvements. And maybe there are some parts that you wherever you rewrite it doesn't change the results, so you don't need to do it anymore. So uh, that's one thing, and also you can do like you can give like the previous history to the rewriting LM here to say like previously there are some successful rewriting examples uh, given here. So how do you rewrite this sentence? Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So there are ways to use it. The feedback. Yeah. But I didn't show it here. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. So we see uh by just rewriting the sentences in the prompt, you can improve the performance by quite a lot. So this is a benchmark, big bench, hard benchmark. So if you run the like evolutionary search algorithm for 50 iterations, then you can get pretty good improvements, like sometimes over 10% on the those challenging tasks. And if you try to see what the prompt engineer, like a automatic algorithm, do, is just rewriting some parts of the prompt, and it doesn't really change the meaning. But even those smaller change can improve the performance by a lot. And you can imagine if you're a human, it's you don't really know how to rewrite it because there's just the same meaning. Sentences that just have the same meaning. Yeah.
Also, one more clarification question. The rewriting language model is the same as the actual language model, which is getting tested, or that is
Yeah,
a
so
different.
that's a good question. So we found the rewriting model has to be stronger. You can use the same one, but it's better if the rewriting model is a strong, like a larger. It's a good LM. Um,
But does it need to be from the same family of models, like
it
something like,
doesn't. I think it doesn't need to be, but there are also some work showing if you rewrite using the same family of model, it's getting better performance. So
okay,
so because I think the intuition is if you're using the same family of the models, it knows the it's more familiar with
distribution?
its distribution of the model.
Yeah, even with the tokenization, something basic, it uses the similar tokens to see the world.
Yeah, yeah,
So maybe that I would explain. Okay,
yeah. Good question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we also show this in some yeah, we also show this is important for some like prompt for diffusion image generation model. So this is a diffusion stable diffusion image generation model where you have a input text and you ask then a diffusion model to generate a image like this. So you can see, we see lots of successful examples, but actually the diffusion models are not very stable to the input text. So for example, this yeah, so these are some failing cases I found in the data set. So for example, it asks a clear and ash clouds uh were shifting across the azure sky, but I think it doesn't look like that. And there are many failing cases for the diffusion models, and we found it's actually can be partially resolved by writing a better prompt. So, for example, this is the work in um, last year, 2 years ago, where uh, if you use the same similar search algorithm here to add some keywords into the input prompt, then we can improve the performance by quite a lot. For example, this is the original prompt we show like in the previous example. And if you add some more keywords here, it's getting a very good generation result. And same for the second example here. Okay, so that I just want to say this is not only for text and for multi-model LLM or generation models. It's also important to get a good prompt. And yeah, then there are some other work on the prompt optimization. Like this AP algorithm becomes quite used quite a lot. And the difference between this one and the evolution search algorithm is that we are trying in AP algorithm they are trying to correct or inject new knowledge into the initial prompt. So for example, in this case, the initial prompt is like it's like detecting a jailbreak attack, and then you can try to run this prompt on the evaluation data. You get some, in some cases it will, you try to find where what mistake it is making. So for example, this is the input and this is the mistake. We show the prediction is different from the label. And the main contribution of this is like they are saying we can pass this the error example and the prediction, the true label and the predicted label into the LM. So LM can think what could be the potential issue of the original prompt, and they can generate. They call this gradient, but the gradient is actually another text prompt. So like this is saying there's an error because the prompt assumes the user attempt to break through the AI system. Would explicitly mention it in their message, but that could be more subtle or indirect. And then you pass this gradient to the prompt, another LN, to combine this correction with the original initial prompt, so you get a new prompt like this. Okay, so this is you can we can kind of think this is follow the same framework where you use the LN to generate a new prompt, but in this case, when we generate a prompt, it's using some error made in the previous examples, and there's a reasoning behind how to generate a new prompt. So it's quite interesting, and this tend to with this algorithm you are able to not only rewrite the sentence, but you can correct the original prompt, or you can add more information into the prompt. Okay, so this is the recent work we're working on, where we try to connect the prompt learning with the model interpretability. So in the work, we argue that prompt learning is actually a way to learn interpretable models. And I'm using this Pokemon classification as an example. So for example, if my LN doesn't know anything about this set of Pokemon, like a species, and I'm given a few examples of Pokemon with their names. And when I see a new Pokemon, I want to predict what is this picture. Uh, so from a human, we can easily see this is probably this one, but we want LLM to learn from this, and we want the learning process to be interpretable such that you can learn the knowledge on how do you decide which one is this Pokemon species. So this cannot be done if you just do fine tuning, because if you just do fine tuning, then you just have a new model and you don't know why the model can make this prediction. Okay, so but it will be but the model will be interpretable if we fix the model and we just learn the prompt. For example, if I'm given the data like this, and I just apply whatever I mentioned, the prompt learning algorithm or prompt engineering algorithm, we get the description, we get this prompt, which gives me a very high performance, like a 90% performance. Then this prompt is kind of telling me how I should classify this species of the Pokemon. So, for example, if I have an algorithm given this data, I generate a prompt like saying a creature is Arceus if it has 4 legs, the first one. If it has 2 legs and orange body, it's oh, I think there's a typo. It's Ruby. Ruby. Otherwise, it's the third one. But anyway, this is a kind of a prompt, including the description of how you make the classification. And if we learn this prompt and this prompt make very accurate prediction, then we kind of know this reveals how this should be classified. And as a human, we can understand what does this mean. Um, what's the decision rule? So I won't go into detail, but you can imagine if we have some very powerful prompt optimization algorithm to generate a prompt from the data, then we kind of achieve this interpretable learning uh, goal. So in this paper, we have proposed something called LLM symbolic program, where instead of having only one prompt, we try to structure it as a tree. So we have a tree, and each node is a prompt, and you make a decision based on passing this prompt to the LN to make a decision whether you want to go left or go right. So this is a kind of decision tree, but each node is an interpretable prompt where you can understand why you go left or go right in each node. And as a result, we are able to generate this kind of decision rule. So in the first node, the prompt is saying we want to, if the creature has the orange body, then we should go left. If it has red body, we should go right. And then the creature has 4 legs, then it's a ruby. It's 2 legs, then it's Arceus. And so you can basically follow. So this is how the model predict, and as a human, we can actually follow this decision rule to predict. So this kind of we can understand what's going on in this data set and how to make classification here. Okay. And why is this useful? So why do we care about Pokemon classification? So actually, it's very useful in many domains where the LN doesn't have enough knowledge to make a classification, but we want to learn from the data. So for example, this is a one of our collaboration with some biomedical lab where we want to classify, determine whether the image shows invasive carcinoma or not. So it's kind of the breast cancer. Uh, we want to detect whether there's a breast cancer or not. So if you just pass this image and this instruction to the language model, it will say it will give some prediction, but it's not very good accuracy. So we talk with some doctors. Usually, they expect the prediction to have like a more than 90% accuracy to be useful. So 65% is totally not useful for them. And then what we can do is we pass those data to LM. We try to learn, use some prompt learning algorithm to learn the prompt. So combine the prompt this new prompt, we can get greater than 90% accuracy on predicting this cancer cells. And even better thing is that because it's just a prompt, we don't really change the language model. We are using the same Gemini Flash model, but just with a more complex prompt learned by the process. So we know all the information learned from data is in this prompt. And so we know when you look at this, when you make a prediction, you need to look at some of these features, and then when the feature have some symptom, that means there's a cancer. Yeah. So basically, this like prompt engineering is very useful not only for achieving better benchmarking performance, but it can be used for like learning from the data and then interact with the domain experts. Okay. Yeah. So any question about the prompt tuning part? Okay. So we only have 15 minutes left, so I will quickly go through the parameter efficient fine tuning part. So it's just a few slides. So I think you already see in previously in BERT or smaller language model, we always do fine tuning. We have pre-train and then fine tune. But in the large language model, what's changed is the size of the model. So if we want to fine tune the model, it requires a large amount of memory. For example, if you have like 100 billion models and you want to fine tune this on a task, then you probably need uh more than eight, or maybe more than 20 GPUs to even fit the model to and able to conduct backpropagation for training. So the memory requirement has become the bottleneck if you want to fine tune the large language model, especially yeah. So there are kind of different scenarios. So for example, people in industry maybe they care less about this because we can just easily run it on hundreds of TPU or GPU. But in, for example, my students in UCLA or in the academic, usually it's very hard to fine tune the whole language model. So the memory requirement is too big for like standard GPU we use. So how do we? So there's a line of research to overcome this challenge called the parameter efficient fine tuning. So the main idea is instead of fine tune the whole language model, I want to fine tune a smaller subset of parameters such that it can be so the training can require much less memory and I can run this with much smaller GPU and uh, even in the academia. Okay. So I will basically describe a few parameter efficient fine tuning PEFT algorithms. And the first one is kind of the very simple baseline is that you just fine tune the top K layers of your language model. And that's kind of people already use it long time ago. So earlier, for example, if you use BERT or earlier language model like Elmo or things like that, you just fine tune the classification head when you use it for some classification task. So that's kind of the top layer. And in general, you can fine tune the top K layers of your neural network. And the benefit is your gradient only need to be computed on the top K layers. So if you're familiar with backpropagation, then you will forward propagate to the loss, and then you only need to backprop to here. So you for the rest of the part, you don't need to maintain any information in those parameters. So the memory requirement will reduce from this whole thing into the top K layers. Uh, and another simple way people do is to add a adapter model. So adapter model can be anything, but in general, the adapter module should be the some kind of neural network, small neural network that map the input to the output with the same dimension. So if the input is d-dimensional vector, the output should also be d-dimensional vector. So you can insert this adapter into any kind of layer in your neural network because it won't change the dimension. So you can just insert it into some part of your neural network to add some trainable parameters. And then you only train the parameters in this adapter instead of the full neural network. So this is one earlier adapter people use, which is kind of similar to the fully connected layer in transformer, but you usually use a much smaller rank here. The R is much smaller here. So you have a input D dimension and you have a feed forward network to down to get a smaller. Also, so it's kind of different from a transformer fully connected because in original one you are increasing the dimension, but here you want to have very small number of parameters, so you typically decrease the dimension, add some nonlinearity, and then have another up projection to recover the original dimension. And but the problem of this approach is that you add some additional inference cost to the neural network. So imagine you're adding this component into a fully connected layer. So when you have a input d-dimensional vector, you need to pass it to the original layer. You also need to pass it to this adapter layer, and then you add the result together or any kind of combination. So uh, so there's a so this become less useful in recently, and a simpler approach, which is more inference friendly, is called LoRa. So LoRa is like becomes, I think, the most widely used the PEFT algorithm. And the idea is kind of similar to this adapter, but the difference is I don't introduce nonlinearity. So I have a d dimension here. I just down project it to R dimension and then up project it back to D dimension. So you can imagine this will look like this. You have the input X. Uh, there's the original weights here, which are frozen because we don't want to train the original weights; it's too large. So we just try to train the LoRa adapter here, where you have two metrics A and B. With the A is the projection metric to map D dimension to R dimension, and B is the R projection to make it back to D dimension. So you have an input, you pass both sides, and you get the output, and then you can go to the next layer. So mathematically, it's written like this. The original layer is like h equal to w times x. With LoRa, you have h equal to w plus ab transpose times x. And the good thing about this is you can add these two things together in the inference time, so you don't really have additional inference cost. Uh, yeah, and in LoRa, we usually initialize. Usually, we want to start from the original model, so we initialize one of these metrics to be zero and another to be normal distribution. So a times b is at zero at the beginning, which ensure your initial point is the original LM. And then we solve this by some standard optimizers. And yeah, basically people use LoRa because we believe there's some low intrinsic dimension in the neural network, and some low dimension adapter could capture important information for some particular task. Yeah, so I won't go into the results in detail, but basically this is from the original LoRa paper where they show it's getting very good improvements and it's kind of competitive to have fine tuning in certain tasks. But in general, I think now there's lots of people using LoRa and fine tuning. So in general, there's still some gap between LoRa and fine tuning. So people are still trying to reduce this gap between parameter efficient fine tuning and the full fine tuning. Okay, so final two slides, I will talk about one of our recent work, just published this year on LoRa fine tuning. So we found there's actually a very very bad training dynamic when you train LoRa with some older existing optimizers. So for example, if I use Eden to train the LoRa A and B parameters, you see the A parameter are, this is the norm of the A, so it almost never gets updated. And most of the updates are on B. And this will cause the problem because you originally want to train both A and B, but now you A is kind of fixed and you just update B, which means you lose half of your expressiveness of your LoRa adapter. And we found the main reason of this is that existing optimizers are not scale invariant. And the scale invariant is very intuitive idea, where if your neural network have the same weights, same LoRa weights, then you should get the same LoRa updates. So like we add A times B into your neural network. So if I have two LoRa pairs, A1 B1 and A2 B2. If A1 B1 equal to A2 B2, then they correspond to the same parameters. So we expect the optimizer should make the same updates no matter how you parameterize your A1 B1 or A2 B2. So if A1 B1 equal to A2 B2, we should get the same update in these two pairs. But all the optimizers are not actually doing this. So even if you just scale a matrix by S and scale up another matrix by 1 over S, then you get a totally different update. And I think that's the reason why is you are not updating the A factor, because uh, the scale is usually the scale is incorrect. So one of the factor is getting very small updates and the other is getting bigger updates. So I will, due to time constraint, I will not go into detail, but in general, we define a notion of untransformed gradient. This is kind of a gradient that is invariant to the transformation I mentioned here. So for no matter how you parameterize your A1, B1, you always get the same gradient, untransformed gradient here. And using this untransformed gradient, we can do the update, which is will become transformation invariance. And these are the results. So we can see by just changing the optimizer to this new one, we can improve performance significantly. Especially we see a lot of improvement on generation tasks like harder tasks like math reasoning or some generation task. Okay. Yeah, so in conclusion, today we talk about large language models and how do you do prompting to use large language model as black box, and how do you do fine tuning in a memory efficient way, especially if you don't have like access to hundreds of GPU, then probably you should consider some of this if you want to fine tune the model. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much and happy to answer any questions.
I have a quick question, but I'll wait if others have questions to ask. Okay. I was just going to ask for the last Lura right that you
Yeah,
talked about here.
yeah.
Uh, so, I mean, assuming that we can come up with some A and B, which are initialized similar to each other, is that going to solve the problem of the different gradients? Like,
Yeah,
and
so I
assuming
think
that A and B can be such that it still get multiplied to give zero.
yeah, that's a good question. So that will kind of partially resolve this behavior.
Yeah.
But still, it won't be like a scale invariant or transformation invariant. So the scale of transformation can still change during training. So we still, even if you don't have this behavior, we still some see benefits of using like scale invariance, transformation invariance optimizers in those cases. Um, and yeah,
I see.
and you're correct. I think starting from some better randomness is kind of a stronger baseline. But
I see.
yeah.
And then my next follow-up question is then like, is there a value of the scale invariant optimizer beyond just LoRa parameters? Something like
Yeah.
the MLPs inside transformer layers also look something similar to in the opposite way, right?
Yeah, that's a
Like,
good question. We're also trying to thinking
okay,
along with that.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, makes sense. Okay, so yeah, I'm guessing there are no more questions. So let's just thank Joe.
Yeah.
It was a great talk. I know most of these topics, but still, like I got to learn quite a lot. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, I guess we are almost on time, so we can just leave now.
Bye bye.